Listen up, City Manager Unfiltered podcast listeners, because I have a special risk-free offer that you can't get anywhere else. I have negotiated this exclusively for you from kudo.ai. That's kudo.ai. You can make your council and school board meetings more accessible with kudo.ai, the AI-powered speech translator designed for local governments. Kudo AI is a patented language accessibility solution that offers real-time, continuous speech translation in 45 plus languages. It ensures that every community member can engage equally during council meetings and public hearings, no matter what language they speak. With closed captions available for those requiring assistive listening technology, live speech translation can create truly inclusive and representative communication between citizens and policymakers. Start your free 1-month trial of kudo.ai today to see how language accessibility can transform your community. To take advantage of this exclusive risk-free offer, go to kudo.ai/CMU. That's kudo, kudo.ai/CMU. I've tried it myself. You're not going to believe how accurate it is. There's no app to download. There's no account to register for. All your users have to do is type in a URL into their smartphone browser or scan the QR code, and that's it. Easy peasy. Go to kudo.ai/CMU to get your free 1-month trial today. You won't regret it. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is Seth Winterhalter of HaltingWinter Municipal Solutions. Seth, you are an executive coach. You specialize in leadership. I will say up front for the audience, to be very transparent to you and the listeners, I have a healthy dose of skepticism and, let's just leave it at that. When it comes to executive coaching and leadership, I feel there's a lot of fluffiness out there, a lot of fluffy content. I want to get into some of that today with you. So welcome to the program. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and give them a little bit of your background?
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Joe. Thanks for the invite. And I hope to convert you today. As someone who actually has been in your shoes and probably still am in your shoes a bit, I do think there's a lot of poor coaching, too many probably consultants who are good people who want to help, but don't really know what coaching or consulting is. We're trying to help you come to solutions for your specific thing, not tell you how to do your thing. And that's a lot of the problem. And that's what I found in my life. You know, I was a farm boy, grew up north of Seattle, became a professional conductor. Still not sure how a farm boy bucking hay in summers becomes a professional musician, but spent my first 10 years conducting orchestras. Moved from that into pastoring. That's another wild story. And so it probably climaxed in my work with Mars Hill Church. If you're familiar with that story, its rise was as great as its fall. And out of that, really started a journey of myself to figure out what was I giving my life to. And I think if you have been in ministry or around the church, there's a lot of words like calling and a lot of things where you can find some big, meaningful purpose. And what I realized is this wasn't the shoe for my foot. I needed something a little bit different, and so I spent the last 3 years really finding that, and I've settled in now. What is executive coaching specifically for municipalities? Trying to really help a place where I think there's a lot of actually overlap, specifically with city managers and pastors. That life, that 24/7 life of really caring for a city, for citizens, for people, and looking forward to a trajectory of health and continued vitality. And so, yeah, it's what I'm trying to give my life to.
Awesome. What sort of launched you into the municipal space? Because for those who don't know, you have pivoted into the public sector, and you and we actually, I guess I should kind of back up a little bit to our kind of origin. You connected with me several months ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, and I try to, as a matter of purpose or intent, to when anyone sends me a connection request, I try to respond to every connection request with a message. The problem with that is that I get many connection requests, and so my inbox is filled with hundreds of messages. And so when people send me messages, it gets lost in the shuffle. It's sometimes I have to stage all my acceptance and batch them so that I make sure I'm current with all my my inbox messages. But I sent you a message and we just had a little polite back and forth. And then some time elapsed. You didn't hit me with a sales pitch right out of the gate or anything. Some time elapsed and we started having some phone calls and discussing things. And you shared with me that you had a heart for the profession, public sector executives, and then you recently started a podcast.
Mhm.
Well, I shouldn't say start the podcast. You recently pivoted your podcast to focus on the municipal executive public sector,
Mhm.
and you didn't even share that with me. You launched the podcast without even giving me a heads up, and I think I know why. I think that was an intent on your part to not come off as looking like a transactional style relationship and what have you. But I was really happy to see that podcast get launched because I think we need more public sector creators putting out content that's focused on city management and local government and so forth. So why don't you walk us through a little bit of like why you're entering the municipal space and the podcasts and all that?
Yeah. So as I left ministry and was looking for my next thing, I had done, in ministry, you kind of have two ways. You're either really spiritually focused on heaven and the afterlife, or you're practically focused on a city and a community, or you're probably somewhere in between. I was very focused on making my community better. We did a lot of effort in foster care, a lot of partnership with our city, with festivals and summer events and things of that nature. And so I did a lot of coaching. I was a part of a lot of city projects, park developments, etc. And so
This is why you're a pastor, right?
yes, this is while I'm
Wearing
pastoring.
two hats. Okay, got you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I really saw the pastor hat that way, as being the spiritual leader of a city with real dynamics. And that's why I see a city manager has the physical aspects, right? We take care of, make sure all the things that make a city function physically and practically happen. And so as I was in the space of transition, I was trying to figure out who I was going to serve and how I wanted to help. And that started with businesses. I had some connections in the business space, and I started working with Donald Miller, who's been an acquaintance for a long time, who runs Business Made Simple, StoryBrand Marketing. If you're a marketer, I'm sure you're familiar with StoryBrand. And so I started helping them and started working with them in coaching small businesses. Usually, small businesses that are probably around a million in revenue, trying to help them scale to 10 million with a lot of internal leadership structure and organizational revamp. That was fun, but it just something was missing, right? It just wasn't, again, the wrong shoe. It didn't feel meaningful and purposeful to me just to help people make more money. And so I had a friend, I had a couple friends actually in government work, water districts, as well as municipal work, and they started talking about what was going on in here, and I started kind of through conversations, investigation, started going, man, there's some interesting things going on with the lives of city managers and kind of my experience as a pastor, specifically with the demands. My story, kind of my pain point was just the overwhelming demands of not taking care of myself and instead making an organization grow and trying to be a good dad and husband. Right. So I had my personal life, which I felt was dialed in. I had my professional life, which had some success. But man, myself, I woke up in 2018, 100 pounds overweight, totally fried, adrenal glands fried, body fried. And I'm like, I'm successful. How can this happen? I thought I was doing everything right. And
Right.
I wasn't. I was upside down. And that's where I started to look as I started having really with the podcast, we'll talk about this municipal tightrope series. I started to look and have conversations with leaders and go, why are you so unhealthy? Why is burnout such an epidemic? And then when I think we've got the food chart upside down, right? It's kind of like the food pyramid. If you ever seen the food pyramid that we grew up in, which grains were at the bottom, which is totally upside down, right? Protein should be at the bottom. We got to be eating protein. And so I thought, man, my life looks good on paper. It looks good in the reels, but man, it's a mess. And so I thought with city managers, same thing. When you are on call, it's not just city managers; it's leaders.
Yeah.
Leaders we're good leaders because we have another gear, right? But oftentimes we have that gear because we're looking for identity, worth, and value. We're looking for purpose and meaning, and we will sacrifice ourselves on the altar of that significance.
Yeah,
And so,
something you in your a recent podcast episode, I forget which one it was because I just binged your series, is we talk about leaders having a different gear, and in that
yeah.
episode you said that sometimes we as leaders we forget that not everybody has that gear that they can
Mhm.
rely on. And I know that's something I've kind of suffered from. I don't know if suffered's the right word. I know something that I've had to sort of kind of realize is that, the expectations I have out there are oftentimes my expectations for myself, and they're not fair expectations to have for other people who work underneath me.
That's right.
Um, so yeah, but when you have those expectations and they're not met, it can really it can really drain you, right? Because you're trying to move the ball forward and you feel like you got to do all the heavy lifting, and you feel like you're kind of like the only one on the field doing the pushing or the lifting and the pulling, and it can be rough.
It can be. It can be rough mentally, right? Because you're having these thoughts of, yeah, why aren't people pulling the weight? Why aren't people seeing my efforts? That turns into emotional distraught. Like I'm not feeling satisfied. I'm feeling taken advantage of. I'm starting to feel burnout, and then that leads to physical, right? And so that's why, we'll get into kind of my framework, the ABCs of impactful leadership, but leaders for the most part, do not take care of themselves unless they have
Right.
a crisis. And in fact,
Right.
as I interviewed a lot of these leaders, that was the story over and over was there was a point in their leadership where all of a sudden they hit the wall and we're like, wow, I've got to reset. I've got to start taking some time to, go back to marathon running or take time to do a band or something where I'm actually a person.
Let's unpack that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because you have this podcast series. It's called the Municipal Tightrope. I want you to kind of explain what you were attempting to accomplish with that, and what the sort of goals and objectives are of this podcast. Because you also recently had your very first city manager guest on the podcast, David Cameron, City of Republic, Missouri. Excellent podcast. So if you're listening to this episode, obviously you are. um, Make sure you tune in to that episode with David Cameron, because that was a really enlightening journey going through his experience. And we can get in that maybe later on as well. But what is your goal with the podcast, and what are you planning to do with it?
Yeah. So the Municipal Tightrope podcast series was started out to be a 5-part series. And what I wanted to do first was selfish. I wanted to learn. I wanted to actually not just, I think leaders too, we have a lot of assumptions. And because we tend to be learners and we tend to be thinkers, we can have a lot of assumptions that may not be quite as true as we firmly believe them to be true. So I wanted to learn. I wanted to hear right straight from the horse's mouth of these realities. What's going on in cities? What's the job of a city manager? Who are they and what do they do? And so that's kind of what the Tightrope podcast series was about. But secondly, I really hoped that the series could be used, and that's why you'll see that the first 4 episodes, which are really the unpacking of the series, are 10-minute episodes each, because I thought it might be helpful for city managers to be able to use this to inform people like who they are, what their job is, what the challenges are, and that they're a person, right? I think especially in the political environment we have today, we forget that these people are humans. They're not just caricatures. They're not cartoons creations. Like these are actually human bleeding people that have emotions.
So what's interesting about that series, the short series, is that they're bite-sized pieces, and like you said, I think it gives the layman a good perspective overview. And what's interesting is that you are external to the profession, right? You're
Yeah.
sort of an outsider looking in, so you have a different perspective on it. And I think it really gives, I'm not going to say that all the city council members who are listening to this podcast should go out and necessarily share it with the public, but they could. I mean,
Yeah.
they could basically it would help the citizens in their community better understand the plight of the city manager if they would actually go through and listen to those short segments that you have, because it's like almost like a primer, right, on
Yeah.
city manager life 101.
That's right. And that's what I really hope. The fifth one is the interview with David Cameron. And that's what we hope now to extend. I hope to release an interview a week. And I hope to do 2 things with that. I hope that the audience will be both city managers who will, the predominant audience that I want to speak to are city managers, and
Sure.
for them to hear each other's stories, to be encouraged and inspired that, there are ideas that we can share, but also that we're all humans and we all struggle. I think that's the issue with leadership is you can start to believe the lie that your struggles and challenges are only yours. Everyone else has it better. And then we don't share our challenges. We just grind harder until we hit oblivion.
Yeah.
And,
And
and
that goes
so,
back to that kind of goes back to the episode with Cameron, because Cameron was
yeah,
talking about the fact that he reached a point in his career where he didn't like the person he had become. He
yeah,
completely was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he's almost like repulsed by the
Yeah,
person he had become as a city manager, and he took deliberate steps to change that and said, "Hey, I want to be this way."
that's right.
What's really fascinating is he also is a very big proponent of doing the work needed to improve yourself. Now, I'm not sure exactly if that meant seeing specifically a therapist or a coach or whatnot, but he was very transparent and very much an advocate for this sort of executive coaching or
Yeah.
getting the work done and having that self-awareness, which, honestly, you don't hear a lot of city managers talk about themselves in that candid of a way like the way
Hmm.
David did, which I thought was pretty fascinating about your interview.
Very much so. And he really pushed executive coaching, and he's not a client of mine. We hadn't even talked about executive coaching.
Right.
And so, I thought it was very transparent. And I think uh, the key is so with this podcast series too, I hope that city managers will come on and be able to unpack their stories, give us some background to who they are, talk about what led them into city management, talk about what they're experiencing in their city, and then talk about some of the realities, some of the challenges personally and professionally. And I hope that their community, their communications people would use these interviews to inform their citizens to say, hey,
Yeah.
our people are real. So I kind of a multifaceted approach in why I'm doing the podcast. But yeah, I think that in the tagline of the podcast is the Municipal Tightrope Podcast, taming the three-headed snake. And I really wanted to dive into that. A city manager is a unique profession in that it has three stakeholders that are very interesting. It has elected officials, it has department heads, and it has citizens. And that's where, when you say David came to that place when he looked in the mirror and said, what in the world, who am I? Well, when you have three stakeholders that are so unique like that, you will be it will be overwhelming to be individual and to be you, because you're trying to
And
listen to
and make
so
them all
many voices
happy.
shape you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Your
Yeah.
whole job is to make people, and you've talked about this, and this is a part of the association you just founded. And this was came up over and over in the interviews. The idea of, especially if you have children, if you're a city manager with family, you don't want to uproot them every 2 years to a new city, to a new, because it's not like you can get another job as a city manager inside your city. You've got
No.
to move. And
Yes.
man, the
Very
pressure that
disruptive.
very disruptive. The pressure that puts on a city manager to be politically motivated, to write, to really not, or to do things, either to not do things and just keep the status quo, or to do things that really aren't thinking about the health and longevity of the city, but are for the here and now. Like,
Well, I'll even go one step further, Seth,
yeah,
because you have a lot of city managers who, because they do not want to disrupt the family, they do not want to force, the kids to go into a new school. The wife doesn't want to, or husband does not want to relocate because their job or whatever.
mhm,
You have a lot of city managers who have to endure a lot of abuse and toxic environments they're just not happy, and it grinds them down because they are sacrificing for their family. And what's
that's right.
interesting with city managers is that everything we do, and I'm not trying to play the martyr card or whatever. I mean, we all voluntarily enter the profession, so it's not like we're, innocent victims here, but it's like, you come into the profession and everything is about everybody else. Everyone eats first, everyone gets the credit first, you get all the blame, you take the heat, it's on you, the buck stops with you. It's like you're just giving to others, and you get very little in return, except and this is why, I I have people all the time, hit me up on LinkedIn and say, I'm thinking about becoming a city manager, and what do you think? And my question is to you is like, what are you trying to accomplish? What's your goal and objective
Mm,
of being a city manager? Like, well, in fact, I just had a conversation. I have to follow up with an answer, but this person says, well, I want to serve people. And my response to this person is going to be, well, you can serve people without being a city manager. So what is it about being a city manager that makes you want to be a city manager? You know what I mean?
that's right.
It's like,
Well,
you gotta go deeper than just, I want to be a public servant or I want to help people. You can do that any number of ways.
you know what I tell them what a mentor told me once: go sell ice cream. That's the only way to serve people and actually make them happy. And I would say in 2024, that's not even a viable way to make everyone happy, because we got so many lactose intolerant people now. So you won't even have their right ice cream. So it is, yeah, exactly. You've got, and one of the other things I'm concerned about, which is why I'm focusing really on city managers with my executive coaching, is I think we have a problem in the current situation with assistants. Assistants are looking and going, I'm not interested in becoming a city manager because I can make decent money in my role now and not have to take that heat and not have
Spot
to
on.
take that risk. So why would I?
Well, spot on, Seth. I've talked about this numerous times. Is that the risk premium between the city manager position and the assistant city manager position is does not justify the reward is not justifying the risk. The compensation needs to be dramatically increased. And I'm not saying again. Every time I say this, I get assistant city managers who say that there's risk to their job too, and a lot of them don't have contracts. And yes, that's true for sure, of course. I've been in that situation myself,
Mm,
where um, but the reality is that the city manager is in a far riskier position, and there should be a premium. I just posted a story, man. This is probably maybe a couple months ago now, about how in the airline industry you're having issues with the assistant. I don't know, co captains or whatever. They don't want
sure.
to send to be captain because the pay, even though it's significantly higher, all the sacrifices and the stress that comes with the job and the ongoing education or whatever the requirements are so onerous that they're just like, no, I'll just be in the number 2 seat. I don't need to be the
Mm,
captain.
mm,
And I think we're seeing that all across the country in all our institutions, because all our institutions are seemingly under attack at the same time.
mm.
And that's for a discussion for another day. But I think a lot of it has to do with this rise of one, social media, instant dissemination of information,
Yeah.
the prevalence of being able to Google information, and everyone's like an instant expert on. It's like I made
Yeah.
this joke before. It's like, today everyone's an expert on Ukraine. Tomorrow's everyone's an expert on hurricanes.
Mm,
Tomorrow, the day after, everyone's an expert on ballistics and assassination attempts. It just never ends. Like, everyone's an expert, right? And
yeah.
so I see a lot of pressure being exerted on leaders of these institutions because everyone knows everything.
Yeah.
And if you're the leader, apparently you're the only one in the world who knows jack shit about your job, but everyone else knows everything more about your position.
That's
It's
right.
crazy.
That's
It's
right. That's why I think at the heart of my desire to be an executive coach is a leader needs a place besides between their two ears, that the overwhelmed brain, to just vent, to just be able to talk about those things, to say this is what's going on. And I think a good executive coach again isn't trying to there, this is the issue with men and women, right? Most guys in a relationship are trying to, every time the wife says, "Hey, I have this problem," we're trying to fix it. We
solve
break
it.
out the
Yeah.
toolbox and solve
Yeah.
it. And they're just like, "Can you just listen to me?" It's the same thing with a coach. A good coach isn't there to just solve everything for you. In fact, they're there to listen and sometimes just to empathize, to go, man, I
Right.
get that. And I think that's where me living that pastoral life, that public spotlight life, that place where they don't throw a lot of parades for you, but they sure demand a lot of you. Why weren't you there for the wedding? Why weren't you there for the kid's birthday? Why weren't you there for this event? And
Yeah.
so there's a demand, right? A pull to, and so you have to, I think that's why my leadership, I'm not here just to coach you professionally. I'm here to make sure personally you're being accountable to the things that you say matter most to you. And then out of that, let's make good professional decisions and impact.
You know, I'm kind of curious about this because in your podcast series, you would refer to a lot of the individuals as, a city manager from a small town, Midwest city or something, or a coastal community. You didn't put any names on there. And I've often said on this podcast or on LinkedIn posts, I go, man, if I could actually share all the stories that people tell me, behind the scenes, behind closed doors or off the record, I could write books and have some amazing tales. One of the frustrating things for me, it's a blessing and a curse, and I think you're going to know exactly what I mean when I say this, is that over the last 2 years of building this platform, I become essentially a pseudo therapist, counselor,
Mhm.
sounding board for these individuals. And it's hilarious because, I'll have an hour long conversation, and I don't mind. I'm doing this because I want to serve my peers and I like to give. But it's like I have this hour long conversation, sometimes longer, right? For
Mhm.
if the rant is particularly a long one, right? And we'll be talking, and it's like they dump all this on me, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but they're dumping their stresses and
Yeah.
frustrations and concerns on me, and then the conversation is, but of course, this is all off the record, and please don't tell anybody. I'm like, of course, but like, what do you want me to do? Like,
Yeah.
I want to do something with it. I can't, and I get so many messages that I can't post, and what have you, and so many touch points. So, what was your experience like when you were talking to these city managers and doing the legwork for your podcast series. Because what's crazy to me about this, Seth, is I know your work ethic is strong for a couple reasons. One, I have little birdies everywhere in this profession when you have this platform. So they send me messages. So I had multiple people send me text screenshots or forward me emails that you had sent to them, basically announcing yourself to the public sector about what you're doing. And so I know you're out there doing a lot of legwork, reaching out to these public sector executives. And I'm wondering, what was that dynamic like in order for you to get them to open up to you and confide in this to you, especially since you are an interloper. And I don't mean that in a
Yeah.
negative way, but you're a
Yep.
foreigner to the space. Like you're not part of the brotherhood, so to speak,
That's right.
right? So
Yeah.
how did you get these? First of all, how did you reach out to these managers? How did you get them to open up to you and get their confidence and trust? And man, you put a lot of work in to drop basically 4 or 5 10-minute episodes.
Yes. So in 2024 January, I decided to go all in on municipalities, right? And that was my niche. This is where I'm at. I planted the flag. I have sent in that in uh, my assistant counted up just 1 week that I had sent almost over 2,000 emails. And that's what, right? Because no one gets, I don't do spam emails. Like if you get an email from me, it's from me. It's from either me or I used one person for 1 month, I think, to help me with that. We don't send group emails, da da da. It's one on
Yeah.
one. We're
So
trying to reach out to
You're
you.
not using Mailchimp to send out a 2,000 email blast. These are
Now,
all individually typed in emails.
I have a newsletter if you want to subscribe to that, but and again, and I have a list that I have curated myself by going to the city of X and finding your email and finding your phone number. I've curated a list of thousands, right?
Yeah,
It's probably as big as the ICMAs, right? And so, and I could put that into my newsletter and just subscribe you, but I wouldn't do that because I want you to participate. I want you to serve. So what I did for this podcast is I said, I got to start emailing isn't enough. It's hard to break in, right? Like you said, I'm
it
not in the
is.
brotherhood. It's like, who are you? What have you done? Who's this pastor? Right. And
Right.
so I said, I'm just going to start calling people and see if they'll have a conversation. And so that's why I created the other reason, selfishly, I wanted to learn. And so I think I sent multiple emails. I had multiple calls, hundreds of calls, but I think it was 38 was the final number, 37, or sorry, 47, 48 city managers, city administrators actually got on the phone and had, 15 to 25-minute conversations with me. And I opened the podcast series, as you'll see I think it's in the first episode. I asked them the original question on a scale of 1 to 10 when it comes to elected officials, department heads. What do you feel? What would you rate the culture, the health and vitality of the culture? 1 being toxic, absolute chaos. 10 being we're all singing Kumbaya with Cinnabons in our mouth. Awesome. What do you think is the culture? And what's interesting is we had some people say 2s and 3s in chaos. Most people said probably 6 to 8. Uh, but then as the conversation went on, you could tell it was always a little lower than what the 8, right? And that's why they started to think about, right? And again, and I said the only way I think people participate, I said it's totally anonymous. I'm not recording anything. I'm not going to mention names or places because I wanted them to feel like they could actually have a space to just share. And out of that, I think that's why we had some pretty transparent conversations.
Well, it's interesting you say the whole culture and rating and everything, because earlier I talked about my skepticism and my concern about the fluffiness of the subjective nature of coaching and leadership talks and
Yeah.
what have you. And I had Jose Madrigal. He's the Durango, Colorado manager on the podcast, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen to that one yet. But we talked about culture change in his organization, and the reason why I brought him on to talk about that is because he had actual metrics. He had created baselines and also had a full year of results to take another snapshot in time to assess what he was doing. And so to me, I was like, okay, that gets past my BS filter because I want to see metrics. Don't just tell me how you feel or what you
Mm,
think or anecdotally. I want to hear more about tangible, real results. And I guess that's the frustration I have in general, Seth, when it comes to leadership discussions. One, because I think a lot of people, there's a saying, those who can do and those who can't teach, right? Or something
yep.
like that.
Yep.
And sometimes I feel like a lot of leadership stuff that we get are from people who don't really have the bona fides to really talk about it.
Mm.
but they want to enter the space and have conversations. And I'm not saying everybody, and I'm not even gonna think of any specific person when I have this conversation with you. I'm thinking more. I'm not even really. I'm thinking more even outside the public sector space in general. But when it comes to coaching, that's a little bit of a different thing, and I'm a little, and that's where I get a little bit kind of sketchy, because here's the deal: how do you find a coach that is the right fit? And like, how many different sessions do I have to have with a coach before I figure like, are we clicking or not? Or is this even
Yeah.
making sense? Or is this person just stroking my ego to make me feel good or what have you? So, you know, what are your thoughts on the approach for finding a coach?
I think there are a couple things you first have to consider. You have to consider the first thing have to ask yourself is, why do you want one? Right? Well, is it because you're in desperate need, which is oftentimes the case? Like most people want to do it themselves until they have a breakdown, personally, professionally, they hit a wall. And I think that's kind of you don't want to be in that. You want to find, I think, co- look at every successful athlete. Look at they have coaches. You have people, because you can't see your blind spots. You need insight. You need accountability. That's what a coach gives you. But first, you have to kind of ask, what area of my life do I need this coach? Then you kind of have to ask. I think the issue with a lot of coaches and consultants is that they have their own framework that they're trying to pitch. And that framework is usually so specific, like we're DISC certified, we're strength finders, we're Sigma, whatever, right? We're black belt karate ninja. Great. But is that actually going to work for this organization? And I think that's where, as you said, I didn't go to consulting school in my 20s and climbed the rank of a consulting firm. I went out and built businesses and founded nonprofits and led and figured out what worked and what didn't, and what applies to different situations. So I think that's where I do have a philosophy, I have a framework, but that framework I think is the foundational. It's the ABCs. A, you have to become a leader who's self-aware of yourself, of the people around you, and of how you actually communicate and present yourself. Every leader rises and falls on communication. So you have to develop yourself. B, you have to have personal well-being. Like if you're not healthy, even if you're successful, even if you are driven and successful, your organization will have a toxicity. Like we said, we have a different gear. Leaders function differently. That's what makes you leaders. You'll take more risk, you'll burn the candle hotter, and you will grind. And the problem is, look at American cultures, workplace cultures. Their employees don't have that gear. And that's why they're suffering from burnout. It's because they only have our example. And sometimes they have actually two things. They have our example that says burn, baby, burn, but they have our words that say, oh no, we care about health play. We care about work-life balance. Well, we
Right.
don't practice it. Well,
Right.
they're going to go, well, gosh, like they talk about clocking out at this time and that's okay, but the boss never does. And so, gosh, if I clock out, I'm going to look bad. So it's A, B, it's A, leadership awareness. Are you an actual leader? B, or do you actually have a full life, a robust life, not just a work life? And then C, now when we have those, we can actually change a culture. Now we can
So,
actually have results.
So what would you say in your like the demographic as far as your past experience, what percentage of your clients are coming at you from say, hey, I've just hit that wall. I've reached this crisis point and I need something. And so it's coming out of like almost desperation as opposed to proactively saying, hey, I recognize that something's off and things are going fine, but I need to find another gear or I need to do something differently or what have you. I'm just kind of curious where you're.
Yeah, I wish it was the latter, but it's predominantly the former. It's predominantly if I reach out and at the right time at the right place. So I have a client who they couldn't get the ball moving before they were hired actually to raise employee experience numbers, right? The statistics of workplace, whatever the surveys are. After the pandemic, couldn't raise it, didn't have the fresh eyes to see it's a new environment now. What do you do with remote work? What do you do with this new reality? So, out of desperation to keep their job, hired an executive coach. Another person, elected officials, city council, or not city. They're not in a city. They're in another government agency. But that board of directors, those meetings were so toxic they couldn't handle it anymore. I reached out. I see this problem. We start working together. So yeah, a lot of it is when people wait until the shit hits the fan. And it's like, man, if we could back that up, you probably wouldn't experience some of that chaos.
The reason why I ask is because I've been wrestling personally with some things in my life that, um, for a variety of things that I've just sort of been playing with in my messing with my mind.
Mm.
I'm getting older. I'll be 48 in April. I don't. I'm more successful than I've ever been, but I am also more disappointed than uh, I don't know if that's right. I don't know if it's I'm more disappointed. I'm not happy with hmm, how do I phrase this? I'm more successful than I've ever been, and I'm more fulfilled and gratified than I've ever been. But when it comes to my professional performance, I feel like something's lacking and I'm not hitting on all cylinders, or I feel like
Mm.
I've had decay in my abilities or something, and I feel
Mm.
a little bit off, Seth. Like I
Yep.
feel like I don't know if it's because I'm getting older. I don't know if it's because I'm constantly glued to a cell phone, smartphone nowadays. I feel like I struggle with my ability to focus on meaningful tasks for significant periods of time. I find myself being pulled in so many different directions because I have so many touch points and people reaching out to me and messages coming from here and from this device or this account, and I don't feel as the what's crazy is I'm more productive than I've ever been, but I also don't feel very productive at all. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
And I'm struggling right now with some of that stuff. And I didn't mean for this podcast to even go off into a personal direction like that, but we just sort of had this conversation here, and I figure I need to be kind of like transparent and authentic with my audience because um it's been a struggle. I've been really kind of like the crazy part is I just launched AAME and been going through this whole process of getting it sort of onboarded and up to speed. And I was grinding on stuff with like the James Freed situation for those who follow the podcast, and I've just been really beat down and just ground down on a lot of stuff. And I'm not. I'm trying to like get back into gear. I don't know.
I think, well, first we're going to have a coaching session and we're going to dive into this deeper.
Okay.
But I'll give you a little bit. I think because I think this will be helpful for the audience. You have specifically experienced two really big highs, right? You put all this work into that James Freed. That was really a huge part of the catalyst, probably the growth of the podcast, of your
Right.
awareness,
Very
and
true.
now it's done, right? And so it's like you came to the mountain moment, and now what do you do with that? It's the Tom Brady. If you've ever heard Tom Brady's, I think in a couple interviews on this about the Super Bowl experience, like you win the first one, the second, you have all these rings now. What keeps you motivated? And for him, it wasn't the winning; it was the pursuit of greatness, the pursuit of better, the pursuit of, and I think that's the issue for a lot of us. We don't know. We have these. You have two things happening. You're older, so you have a greater sense of awareness, right? You're not as young and naive, and so you
Right.
know what you can do. You know
And I
you
know,
have a.
and Seth, I see it every day. Like I know, like this is the part that like concerns me. I don't want to BS you and say, oh, I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm like, I know I have more good years behind me than in front of me. I just posted in a newsletter, my weekly newsletter. I just posted about a gentleman, the Lake Geneva, Wisconsin city manager. The dude just retired July 7th and he died September 20th. A couple of years ago, I posted about the Citrus County, Florida county manager. He retires, and then less than a month later, he's dead. And it's like this guy in Lake Geneva was 62 years old or 60 years old. I mean, he's not an old guy. You know.
I so I'm writing a book right now called Balance is Bullshit. The
Okay.
idea of work-life balance. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about work-life balance because it's the tightrope. It's the idea of I've got to please people in my personal life and I got to please people in my professional life. And again, this is where that podcast came out of, the tightrope, the three-headed snake of the municipal tightrope. You've got three people, three huge groups that you're trying to please in your professional life. You've probably got a spouse, you've got children, you have this personal life, and you're just trying to stay on that rope and not fall off. Well, then you have realities. You have, like, again, for you, it's the James Freed case. It's launching the AAME and now going, we've got what, 500 people in this. Now what?
Yeah.
Now how
Yeah.
do we actually make this awesome? Like,
Yeah.
you've had these mountaintop experiences and now there's work to be done, but it's all these stresses of wanting to you're trying to do creative work to figure out, okay, what's next, or how do we make this good. You're also a perfectionist, which means you want it to be much better than it actually can be, which halts a lot of leaders from actually having great impact, is because they're so afraid of it not living up to their potential.
I do suffer from that for
Right?
sure. Paralysis of analysis that leads to quite a bit. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we also, because like you said, death, right? This idea of death comes for us all, and the stats. In fact, the chapter I was just working on this week, this way what you said hit me so strong. The numbers of specifically men that die 2 years after retirement is eye opening.
It scares
It's
the shit out of me, Seth.
it's
Like I've
it's
talked about this
crazy.
numerous times on the I've just it's like it is, and I've admitted on numerous different venues or channels that I'm not I don't have hobbies like
Right.
it's like and I've talked about it. I've talked on LinkedIn. I've talked in private with peers. It's like and you're supposed to have hobby, and I'm trying to diversify that and be a little bit more well rounded.
Yeah.
To have that balance a little bit, because it's like I'm wrapped up into this.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's like a lot of people, they don't understand. Nobody really understands, honestly, except those who have been really intimately following my journey, is that the last 2 years I've essentially been working this full time unpaid as a nonstop as a job, whether it's building LinkedIn, doing the
Mhm.
podcast, which is takes so many hours. Obviously all the stuff I'm doing behind the scenes. I mean, I spend hours a week just talking to people because they have concerns or issues. And again, I'm not trying to throw myself on this martyr card or anything like that. I mean, I choose this, but you know, when you go 2 years nonstop of doing it, and
Mhm.
then like you kind of get to this plateau you talked about, or this, the mountaintop of starting Amy, and then it's like, okay, now I can't. There's no pit stop. Now I just got to get back in and start sprinting again or running again. It's I don't know. It's a little
Yeah.
overwhelming when I stop and think about it. Maybe I try not to think about it because it's so overwhelming.
Probably. And I think that's where I do think what we want to be careful of, especially in a social media age where everyone's flaunting their
Best life.
best life now. Yeah, the most fulfilled life, the perfect life. Listen, we're all cut a little differently. Like I am more like you. I love work. Like I don't. I'll golf. If guys want to go out and golf, I don't really go out by myself. I like a cigar. I like to sit back and read. I love reading, but most of my reading, I have learned to like fictional reading just to not make everything so about work. But even that is sparse because I love work. I love doing this thing. What I've had to realize, what even coaching for myself has helped, is I don't find my identity worth and value, or I don't find all of it in my work. I find significance in my work, but I think that's the issue. We retire, and think about that as city managers. You work, you put all this blood, sweat, and toil into making a city and citizens a all these services that they're not throwing you parades, right? They'll
No.
throw the fire department to parade, but they're not, who's the city manager?
Right.
Who are the city employees for the most part? Think about that. If you didn't have your sewer working for a day, you go crazy. But no
Hmm.
one's going to throw a parade for sewer workers, right? And so there's not as much appreciation as you're going to want to be in such a leadership, right? In such a viable leadership position. And so you got to be okay with that. You got to be okay. I think there's this American idealized legacy. I got to leave a legacy. Hey, the truth is, you're going to be forgotten 2 minutes after you walk out that door. Like, we're just not that important. And you got to be okay with that. That's why I would rather have significance in actually helping someone's life be more enjoyable professionally and personally, and helping them find not just this balance of I got to make people happy, but really an integration, a thriving. And let's figure that out for you individually, because it's going to look different than Tim down the road or Sandy down the road. We got to figure out you. That's again why I think coaching's important. A good coach, because they actually care about you as a person. They want to get to know you. Maybe that's the first thing you should look for in an executive coach in your first few sessions. How much talking are they doing versus how much listening? Are they getting to know you, or they just want to tell you about how they can fix you?
Yeah, a lot to digest there. You hit the legacy thing. That's kind of a fascinating thing because I think that's definitely a male
Mm.
need or urge. Is to leave a legacy or leave an impact. I know I used to have that. I came to this epiphany recently. When I say recently, it was sometime in the last several years of in my 40s. I used to be a fantasy baseball nerd, and I used to do fantasy baseball and follow
Mm.
sports and everything. I tell people now that I've just become a fantasy city manager nerd, so I know all this instead of knowing all the baseball players and what they're doing in single A, double A, and triple A, and all in the pros. Now I just follow all the city
That's
managers
right.
across the country, and I stopped following baseball completely. Like I still don't pay attention to it anymore. And what trips me out is I remember every now and then I'll come across a story or see something on ESPN, or my brother will text me something about a player, and oh, I remember when that guy was a stud,
Mm.
and I haven't thought about him in forever. I barely could remember his name. It's like, and you're talking about the elite of the elite of the elite, right? The top one
Mhm.
fraction of 1% who make it to professional, the upper echelon, and even those who are really good, you hardly even remember them, right?
Yeah.
Like we're not going to be remembered. Like no one gives a damn about us after we leave. And I do think a lot of times we fail, even though we know it. We're gluttons for punishment, maybe, or we just are. I don't know. We have martyr syndrome, where it's like, so many city managers, they toil in their communities and they are so emotionally invested, and that's not a bad thing. I've been one of those people, but you're so emotionally invested and you don't get that reciprocity. And as soon as they're done with you, they just kick you to the curb anyway. And no one cares,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying you shouldn't care about your community at all, because we all, that's why we're in this business, right? Is to make the world a better place, and we want to make a difference. But I do think there needs to be more balance and understanding of what's truly being exchanged. What are you truly giving up and getting in return, right? Because I think
Yes.
a lot of us give a lot more than we ever get back. And I know
Yes.
that sounds like, woe is me to some of the people who maybe don't, or, aren't city managers, or think I'm putting on a sob story for city managers. But by and large, city managers are so passionate about helping their community and their organization. And I don't. I would even argue that in a vast majority of the instances, those city managers don't get the reward or the reciprocity that it deserves or merits from either the elected officials or the citizens or what have you. And so you have the self motivation bent, right? You're doing it, and we constantly sacrifice those that are closest to us, whether it's our families, right? As far as our,
Very much so.
I yeah, I mean, how many city managers miss their kids' sporting event because they're stuck at night at a council meeting twice a month or something? You know what I mean? And then 2 years later, they're firing your ass and saying, "Get the hell out of here," because they didn't like the way you did something, you know?
This is exactly this is the heart, the crux of a executive coaching and that book I mentioned. It's figuring out how to boundaries. You have to have boundaries, and this is again my story as a pastor. Like again, you're called on. Like people work during the day. Well, guess what? I have to write a keynote message as a pastor every Sunday. And so if
Yeah.
you're a good pastor, you know how hard it is to write a keynote message every single week and to put time into that, plus go to the hospital and do marriage counseling and the kids birthdays, and that's
And
everyone
funerals,
funerals,
everything.
that's everyone else's demands on you, plus you have your own family, right? I had 4 kids, so it's very demanding. And so here's what I learned over the last couple of years as I really pulled back and said, what led me to some of the burnout that I experienced. A, it was
Can,
people
can I can I
please.
can I stop you there real quick?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because what is burnout? Do you have a
Bur-
definition? Because I think the word burnout is, I don't know if we are all operating under the same definition of what burnout means.
yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah, I think yes, burnout is like, oh, I don't like this, I don't feel this. Burnout is a candle, right? What happens when it goes through all its wax? Basically, burnout is the result of you not having boundaries, of you not articulating actual mental, physical, emotional needs. It's you coming to the end of yourself and then you burn out. You have nothing left to give. And so that's why I think burnout is an emotional, mental, physical sapping of all those things. And so it's not we it's not being tired. It's not being those might be things that are showing that you're on a trajectory towards burnout, but I think there aren't many people think that they're burnt out and it's like you still have plenty in the tank. You just don't like what you do, or you're not, there's a
Thank
lot
you.
of those
That's
things.
kind of what I want. I think there's a conflation of burning out versus compared to just working to exhaustion. And
Yes,
work you can work to exhaustion but not feel burnt out.
totally. When you hit burnout, you'll know it. Like I hit burnout. I believe I actually hit burnout, pretty close to burnout. Meaning this, I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. Like my body was toast. It was fried. My mind was fried. And I know because my emotions were fried long before I became totally cut off emotionally. I had nothing to give emotionally. And that happened, I don't, maybe even a year, maybe 2 years. Then it was mentally. I just started checking out and going through the motions, and then it hit me physically. And so it had to hit me all three to really go, wow, there's nothing. I'm not interested in even giving anything anymore because I'm just so fried.
Is burnout is it I don't know if I've ever truly been burnt out,
Yeah,
if
I
I'm
don't
being
think
honest.
that's not.
I've been worn down and I've been
Yeah,
beat down and I've been miserable. My wife would probably say I was burnt out in one particular instance, but I've had some tough, some dark valleys, right? So
yeah,
but never why I didn't want to get out of bed, I guess per se. But I wasn't bounding to work, right? I wasn't super excited, and
yeah.
I couldn't wait for it to end. Um, when you are burned out, is it demonstrate or is it pervasive across all phases or functions of your life, or is it just in a specific area, say of work? Like, or does it just basically bleed over? You're just done with everything.
I would say real burnout is when you're done with everything. When it
Okay.
impacts. So I say in my story in this book, I say my kids are everything to me. I will move heaven and earth for my kids. I came to the point where I was even concerned that the motivation for my kids wasn't there.
Okay.
That was my wake up call to be like, I'm screwed. Like my number one motivation is not motivating me anymore.
That's a problem.
What's going on here, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, if your burnout is just professionally, that's again, I want to be careful because I don't want to you know, diminish anyone's struggle, but you're not really, these are signs. I think burnout has, again, we're using against just words and semantics, but you could be on a path to burnout if you're not looking at work, but don't. I think that's where we have to be careful of being like, oh, I'm burnt out. It's like, no, you're just, this is called challenge. This is called a hard season. This is called, and that could be your fault. It could be external pressures. Like that's what we got to dig in and find out.
Yeah, I don't want to invalidate anybody going through a tough work situation. I was just more trying to get into the intricacies of the definition of a burnout because I do think that word gets thrown around quite a bit and then
Very
used a
much so.
little bit too cavalierly.
Yeah.
But that's again, that's not to minimize people being in a tough situation because we all go through really dark, dark times at work. It just doesn't
Yeah.
less. Yeah. So
It's like narcissism. Everyone's a narcissist. And it's like,
not me.
I
What do you mean?
not
Not
you,
me, Seth.
not me, exactly. And I think we have to be careful with these. It's the problem of TikTok psychology and therapy, right? Everyone's using very extreme words, and I think back to really the root of what we're talking about is I had to take ownership. I didn't want to say, well, it would have been easy for me to say, well, no one loves me and everyone's using me and blah blah blah. No, what am I doing? And I think that's where I woke up and said, oh, I'm a leader and I'm a people pleaser. Oh my gosh, that was so offensive to me. I'm like, I'm not a people pleaser. I'm a leader, man. I get things done. No one can. I do my thing. I'm rooted in my values and myself. And I go, no, I'm not. I'll take someone's call any time of the day. I will make it my motto in life that I was subconsciously running out of, or being fueled by, was hard on me, easy on them. I want people to feel loved and served. I want to look like a servant leader, so I will kill myself to make sure that I'm loving and serving everyone else, whether that was home, wife, kids, whether professionally. And I woke up and go, I have no boundaries in my life. This
Yeah.
is why I'm dissatisfied. It's because there's no healthy boundaries. And I have taught people to take advantage of me. I've never communicated my desires, my needs. I woke up and I had very few friends. I had a lot of people who thought we were best friends, and I didn't feel safe with any of them.
My wife recently vented to me about some some aspects of what you just communicated, and I'm not going to get to that in this podcast here. My wife is an amazing woman who's just been incredibly supportive and allows me to do my thing. she's put planted some seeds in my head recently about boundaries and the need for boundaries and taking care
Yeah.
of myself and what have you. So yeah, I didn't mean for this podcast to even go on a whole personal introspection. That wasn't the intent here. But you got me,
Okay.
Seth. I don't know.
It's like Oprah Winfrey. I put you on the couch and I dry in. But I think, but that's the key, right? It's having, this is what good coaching is. It's having those conversations to really get introspective and to go and to go, why? Why do I feel this way? Why am I thinking this way? Why am I not getting the momentum? See, I do love, I'm a little bit, maybe that's what's unique about me because I've been a pastor. I can do the counseling thing and I can do the personal thing, but what really motivates me is to do those so that we produce results. Like I love metrics. Like you said, I don't like the wishy-washy of executive coaching because it feels like we have sessions, but what actually happens? Well,
That's the thing, Seth. I feel like that's kind of hitting the nail on the head a little bit when it comes to the whole leadership and executive coaching thing. Like, are you just trying to fluffy, blow smoke up my ass and make me feel good when I leave the room, or are we
yeah,
trying to actually get from point A to point B and extract results, right? To get something
exactly.
done. Like that's yeah,
Exactly. And that's what we have to determine. That's why the C of my ABC framework is actually your organizational culture. Like what's your plan? What are you trying to produce? How can we measure the success of you growing as a leader and your personal tank being full so that it's actually producing something of value? Do your employees like showing up to work? Are you actually seeing them perform? You just had Brooks on. I love this idea of actual performance. Like let's evaluate performance. And performance isn't you show up and you breathe today at your desk. Performance is you did your job and made the city better. Like how let's measure and let's encourage each other to develop and grow personally and professionally so that we can actually make cities better.
absolutely. And for those who are not aware, he's referring to my interview with Brooks Williams in Ferris, Texas, the Rising to Serve with Brooks Williams episode. I think it's episode 73. So Seth, one of the things that I kind of really struggle with personally is asking for help from people. Like that's just not really
Mm,
my deal. And the reason why that is the case is because I was either taken advantage of, manipulated, or wronged by so many people as a young person, right? By people that are closest to you, right? When you have your mom is a drug addict and she's selling pawning off your toys and stealing your Christmas gifts to go get money to buy heroin. You know what I mean?
yeah.
It kind of makes you pretty jaded on things. And I've always just been a high performer and I just get the job done. I'm going to find a way to get the job done. So that's always been my personality. And I think that's kind of breeds into the whole skepticism when it comes to the whole coaching
Mm,
and leadership training and things of that sort of nature. What is the best way for somebody who has an aversion to coaching or to leadership training or however you want to quantify it, right? And seeking outside help or assistance as opposed to just, doing, as opposed to just, relying on your own internal strength and abilities. What is your recommendation for those individuals? Because, many city managers were A-type personalities. We're strong.
mm,
We are objectively elite level performers in various metrics, right? I mean,
yep.
by and large, right? We are alphas in many cases. We go and get results. How should one mentally wrap themselves around the whole idea of asking for help or seeking out help?
It's a great question. I think the best place to start with that is just to remind yourself that you didn't start by being an all-star leader. You didn't start by being an all-star city manager. Everyone had to, right? Your journey towards leadership is you being a help to someone. And if you remember that, man, that's right. You probably wish you would have gotten more credit when you were that help. Uh, Bad leaders take a lot of credit for things or want a lot of credit for things, even if they give credit away or jaded because they didn't get the credit they want. But I think a really healthy, vibrant leader knows that their job is to build better leaders around them. And when you realize that, when I realized this dynamic for myself personally, that I have specific strengths and the strengths I have, I really enjoy probably because when you're operating in your strength, you get a lot of fulfillment because you're actually producing results. when I can focus on my strengths and be honest that, yes, well, I think that I'm a generalist and I can do a lot of things and I have a high standard. The reality is, when I get someone really good at something that I'm not good at, it's 10 times better. And I love it. Like, I'm not having to do that. The team's functioning high. So I think that's kind of the key for good leadership, is to go, let's be honest about what we're good at. Let's be mindful that every strength also has a shadow weakness. And so strengths just aren't, oftentimes we think a strength is a strength and a weakness, and they have separation. I'm, strength finders. I'm not going to work on my weaknesses. I'm going to let other people shore those up. Well, every strength has a dark side too, that you could, like, for instance, I'm a perfectionist. Like, I have a high quality, I have excellence, right? I want excellence. Well, guess what? That excellence can make me never launch anything or never actually do anything, because I'm always waiting for it to be perfect. So you need to understand yourself, and you need to then surround yourself with the people who not only don't have your strengths, but then, man, focusing on building them up. That's what gives you, I think that's what, back to our conversation of, you retire and then you die. Why? Because you have no purpose. You have no meaning. Well, guess what? When I retire, whenever I figure out when to call it quits and go off and play golf all day, I'm going to be able to hopefully look back and see all these people now enjoying their life. My fulfillment will be in their fulfillment to continue to rise. I think that helps us, because our life isn't centered on us. Like, we talk a
Yeah.
big game sometimes about serving, and I serve and I serve. But I think when we really break that apart, it can be so myopic and still me focused that it's not really serving. It's really serving myself. And so I think we all, and that is not something, this is why good executive coaching isn't like, let's have 3 sessions and fix you. It's a relationship over a lifetime that really helps you be honest about, I'm going to have to grow through this and work through this. Because life is too changing, right? The whole idea of work-life balance, again, back to this, is like, I'm going to figure it out and then life's going to be good for me. Like, I'll figure out how to ride the bike and then it'll be good. The problem is life changes. We
Yeah.
just had a pandemic that totally altered the reality of work and life.
I think the thing that troubles me, I guess, Seth, if I'm putting myself on the couch and really doing an introspective deep dive, is that throughout my entire life, no matter what I've accomplished, the heights of success or whatnot, and by any tangible measure, I've been a strong performer in X, Y, and Z. That's not to say I haven't fallen or fell on my face or had failures, but I've been very successful at certain things I've set myself to my mind to do,
Mm-hmm.
and each time I've sort of reached the mountaintop, to use that expression that was used earlier for that effort or what have you, like, it's not enough. Like, it's not satiated. Like, I don't
Yes.
feel fulfilled. Like, I'm like, okay, I don't really enjoy the moment. It's just
Yeah.
okay, on to the next, right? And I did have a little bit of an epiphany over the last 2 years of working on this whole LinkedIn podcast and now AME journey, right? And the interesting thing about this whole experience is that it was totally organic. There was never an agenda of, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to lead to A, B, C. It was just, everything was organic. There was no plan.
Mm.
Unlike all the other things I set my mind to do, is like, oh, I want to do X, Y, and Z. I want to accomplish this. I want to hit this target. And I've received so much of a greater sense of fulfillment and gratification and gratitude, and just feeling more whole than I've ever felt,
Mm.
by virtue of being able to help so many of my peers through this process, right? And being that individual who can connect with those who are suffering or having these journeys that they're going through, and they feel like they're all alone, and I'm able to be a sounding board. We're recording this podcast right now, and I literally have a city manager. I won't get into specifics, but the city manager relocated with his pregnant wife out of state to a new job. He's been there less than 6 months, and he just bought a house, just had his first kid like weeks ago. And this person's facing termination for cause, for no legitimate reason. He's totally going to get possibly hosed by his governing body, right?
Mm.
And I'm like, this is so wrong. This is
Yep.
so wrong. This person literally cannot unpack their house and settle in because they just bought it, and now they might need to sell it, because what are you going to do? Where's he going to get a job to pay the
Yeah.
bills, right?
Yep.
So we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in commissions for a real estate agent, on top of just relocation in and of itself. And this poor guy and his wife, who I'm sure is just stressed out of her mind, they just had a kid, literally, kid's less than a month old, and they
Mm,
can't even enjoy the joys of being a first time parent, right?
yes.
And I'm just so livid and I'm frustrated. And so, like, I spent my morning reaching out to some attorneys and trying to get some sort of legal representation and helping this individual and trying to be, moral support. And I just have an amazing sense of pride and fulfillment as a result of this journey, right?
Yes.
And that's what sort of fuels me today. It's like that's the passion, like that's the energy. Like I've never had this before. And so that's why to kind of get back to this whole weird, and man, I didn't really mean to get all personal in this episode, but to kind of come full circle, I'm having this really strange battle where it's like everything is sort of clicking on all cylinders as far as the professional fulfillment and satisfaction, right?
Mm,
Financially, my family's in its best shape we've ever been, my wife and I, right? My kids are doing great. Uh, by and large, everything is just amazing, but I don't feel like I'm in need of of help in the sense that like there's something bad going on, but I'm in this weird place of like, but I'm not hitting on all cylinders, and there's still something kind of like I need to fine tune, I guess, and that's like kind of like the realization I've come to. And I don't know. I don't know. This is maybe the worst episode I've recorded, but it's like, it's like I don't know. I want to work on that because I feel like there's just something missing, and I don't know what it is.
well, here's what I would propose that you chew on. I think you're finding fulfillment because you're living kind of in the present, right? Things are coming to you. You have things that are right. You have projects. You had the James Freed thing. You had the AME. You have these projects that you're working on. You have the continued podcast, but you're also allowing yourself to be a conduit for service to help these people to write. And that's what you're trying to. And you also have this kind of like that story about the city manager in this horrible predicament. That's why you have the AAME, is to be able to serve, right, city
Exactly right.
managers in this. And so I think you're going to be finding purpose. Now, you also are going to have these climactic moments. And I think for most leaders, you're not unique in that we actually struggle the most with climax. We will hit these, we will get to the top of the mountain and then go,
Now what?
now what? Like, and it's almost a deflating.
It
And that,
is.
what does that tell you? That tells you that we are journey people. We love the journey. And let's be real transparent. This is where, how many people right now listen to this? Do you love chaos? Let's be honest. I think we like a
I
little bit of
well my
chaos.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely I've been. My wife says I thrive in chaos.
You
Like I
thrive against,
yeah.
because why is that? Because most high driven leaders need to feel like we are like we need to feel a sense of like the impossible journey. It's like a movie narrative, right? It's the Death Star. We need that pressure to almost click us into the high gear of super powered activity. And so when you don't have that, especially now you've hit a couple mountains and you're kind of at the base again.
You're
You're
right.
starting over and you've got to, get the momentum and create some chaos. And so this is where, again, with coaching, it'd be like, let's be honest about that. Let's kind of settle and go, maybe I don't need chaos all the time, but also chaos isn't a bad thing. And guess what? It will come. It will come. You don't need to go creating it and manufacturing it. Life has enough of its own. The key then is to go, okay, how can I recharge? And this is where, again, we talked about burnout. We've talked about too many leaders thrive on that chaos. So then they manufacture it because they have drama in their life they won't deal with, right? This is, again, if you want to go back to Dave Cameron's story, I think this is where, right, he struggled with alcohol. He struggled with some things because it's so tempting for leaders to, when we hit the mountain, to just create more chaos, to create more, because we need that drive, we need that focus, because we don't want to deal with the other parts of our life. Like, okay, let's strip that back and investigate. Let's look and go, does that mean everyone needs a hobby? No, but it might mean you have a spouse. How can you make sure that, are things really healthy there? Could they be healthier? What if you put some, not all, some attention into making that as good as the AME? What would that even look like? Have you ever dreamed about that? Have you ever even thought like, man, what would it be like to do something crazy cool out of the box instead of the same Friday's date night at Chili's? And so that's
Yeah.
where I think it's thinking, it's having the safe place to not just think inside your head, but to think with someone else who can actually give some some tactical, real life pushback into the aspects of your life.
Yeah. I'm going to get real sad and emotional if I really think about what you just said there, Seth,
Mm,
because the reality is I've put a ton into this journey that I've been on for the last 2 years and haven't put nearly as much into my relationship with my wife, who's amazing. So,
yeah.
um, I don't know. I guess we'll end on. I don't know. I think I'm gonna. I think I need to pull the covers back over and let's
Yeah.
and maybe wrap this up. I don't know if this is even gonna see the light. We might have to
Well,
re-record this episode. I don't know.
well, well, let me even say something to that. Let me say something to that because I love what you're feeling right now. It's good, it's authentic, and hopefully it'll make you think of life not on a tightrope, but in a rubber band. A rubber band is my analogy, and that's kind of the big thing of the book I'm writing is you have to, instead of being stretched and pulled by the whims and calls of everyone else, why don't you push? Why don't you decide, you know what? Now is a season where I'm going to push into the AAME or into work or into my wife. I'm going to take a season and pull back some tension from this aspect so I can push here. That's what a life of real intentional purpose and meaning, I think, comes from, is when you start making those decisions. You start deciding, and that again is going to be unique for you. It's your story. It's your right needs, wants, desires, and I think that's where you got to figure that out. And here's the big thing for leaders, and again, we're talking to city managers. You have a lot of things going on in that city that you can give yourself to. A lot of projects, a lot of things. What you don't,
Absolutely, it's
what
very
you
easy.
very easy to continue just to work, work, work. And it's the lie of, well, it's just a season. It's just a season.
Well, it's even more, Seth. We get to lie to ourselves and say we're doing yeoman's work, right? We're doing important work. This isn't,
Important.
no offense to the janitor or what, whatever. Like we are leading cities, right? We are
That's right.
important people. It's easy to tell ourselves this, right? And by
That's
we're
right.
rationalizing to ourselves why we are putting a family member on the back burner, or why we're putting this friendship on the back burner, or why we're
That's
not
right.
taking care of this health issue because we got to save the world, right?
Exactly. And so I'll close with this. I learned this lesson that I thought I was doing good by providing, and I thought I was loving through that provision. I was loving through time well spent. But when I woke up, I said, you know what? I have taken advantage of the closest relationships to me and their ability to forgive me for pursuing significance in my profession instead of finding significance in all aspects. Do I think you should find significance in your profession? Absolutely. But you should find significance in your relationships as well. You should find significance just in yourself. So you don't have to find everything in why do people make horrible dating decisions? Because they're finding significance in something external. Let's find it internally. Let's have healthy relationships out of that, and let's do something significant in our profession, all rooted in a healthy self.
Thank you, Seth. I'm going to get off the couch now and wrap this up. Why don't you give people a quick idea of where they can find you, how they can locate you on the internets, and I'll link to it all in the show notes as well.
Yeah, Seth Winterhalter on LinkedIn. Our website is HaltingWinter, HaltingWinter, haltingwinter.com. And in fact, something I'm chewing on, some people, executive coaching, that one-on-one feels a little intimidating. So one of the things I'm chewing on, in fact, we'll talk off camera on this, is something I'm throwing around, the Municipal Leadership Accelerator, a mastermind experience where if you kind of are like, man, one person in counseling, I don't know, this sounds a little intense. Well, what if we get a bunch of city managers together? What if we get 8 to 10 into these pods where, yes, I'm going to lead you in the ABCs of leadership, but we're actually going to work together, and we're going to be highly applicable to real life situations. It's not going to be some metaphysical, like, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's actually going on in your life personally and professionally? And how do we create some bonds? Because that's really another concern I have. It was a concern I have as a conductor. My teacher, the famous Harold Faberman, famous conductor, he was a horrible person. Meaning, relationally, he was so hard on us. You have not known difficult until you had this German yelling at you, screaming at you, cussing at you while you're trying to conduct an orchestra. And he said he was so hard on us because he was so concerned that conductors live such individual lives. We were so at odds against other conductors because there's not very many jobs and you're a conductor. It's not like you're violinists working together. So he said, I'm going to make it really hard on you so that you will bind yourself to the other students in this program, that you actually have healthy relationships. I'm concerned in the same reality with city managers. You take it from all sides of that three-headed snake, and even multiple, more than three. You can feel very alone. You can start to tell yourself that your situation is very unique in its negative aspects. I think masterminds that actually put you in a group, that actually have some vulnerability, but also make some accountability personally and professionally, could be the best thing for you. So anyway, I'm chewing on this. I'm creating this idea. If that's of interest, I would love for you to hit me up on LinkedIn, and let's create a program that actually works for you, right? I don't have all the answers. Again, I'm new to this world, but I think I've had enough experience in leadership and in similarities with city management, and that pressure, that fishbowl pressure of being on all the time, of never feeling like you go to the grocery store. Hey, here's a time I can talk to you. You're on date night. Hey, let me tell you about how I'm frustrated with my HOA, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the smaller the city you are. When I did this podcast series, it was interesting to me that the city managers in cities of hundreds of thousands of people, 1 million, they could hide.
Yes, it's very easy.
When you're in a
Small
city,
town, you're
the
always
small town,
on.
they knew what car you drove. They know where your house is. I had people tell me they shop an hour and a half away at a Costco
Just to get away.
just so they can actually shop in peace and not
Yeah.
feel the tension. And it's not that, I don't think it's the reality that you're bothered all the time. It's
No.
tension
But
of
you
it.
can just never let your hair down. Like, you just never be real. You can just never be
Exactly.
normal because
You
everyone's
have to
watching you.
always,
Yeah.
you have to always be on. And I felt
Yeah.
that as a pastor, and I think that there's a lot of similarities with city managers. So again, Seth Winterhalter, HaltingWinter.com. If we can help, I oftentimes give, as much as I'm able, a free first-time coaching session just to unpack some things, just to be a help. And especially if you're in a situation, like you said, this person, this city manager who's just in the fire now, I'm concerned that there are many city managers in the fire, and instead of reaching out and even articulating that they're struggling, they're just going to bear it and just burn out, flame out, and just be like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, you're not done. Like, there is support, there is help. Reach out, connect. Let's figure out a way to help.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Seth. Seth Winterhalter, HaltingWinter Municipal Solutions. Thank you very much. Had no idea we were going to go this direction on this podcast. We did not follow the outline at all. I blame myself. We'll see if this episode ever sees the light of day. Thanks, Seth. I appreciate your time, man. I was a really good chat, a really meaningful chat, and I got value out of it. Hopefully some of our listeners did too. So thank you very much. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered Podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. If you enjoy the program, please make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button so you get each episode every week. And then also, please leave a rating and review on your platform of choice. I would greatly appreciate it. We'll see you next week.